everybody. This is Liz Stanton from Synapse, and you're joining us for our webinar on understanding the Clean Energy Incentive Program in EPA's Clean Power Plan. So thanks, everybody, for being on the line with us. I know that more people are joining even as I speak, and that a lot of you, I know from looking at the registrations, have joined us for previous webinars. This is part of a series of webinars on the Clean Power Plan. We've had quite a few in the past, which you can access both the slides and the audio on our website. And we have 3 more coming up in the future, and I'll talk to you about those at the end of this presentation. So a few logistics to start off with. The webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be circulated to all attendees with the slides, and we'll get that out to you later on today or tomorrow. All of the attendees have been muted. That's how we do our webinars. We would like to take your questions and share your comments, but the way to get that information to us is using an email. The email is webinar@synapse-energy.com. So if you have any technical questions that come up during the presentation, you're having a problem with your audio or your video, use the chat feature in WebEx to let us know right away. If, however, you want to ask us a substantive question or make a comment, then send that to the webinar email address, and I'll be monitoring those as the moderator of the discussion and introducing the questions into the conversation after the presenters have finished their slides. So many of you know us already. We're Synapse Energy Economics. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we do a lot of work mostly for advocates and environmental advocates and consumer advocates for a lot of government agencies. We do work that focuses on energy issues, much of that on the electric sector, but sometimes branching out into other energy areas. And we've been spending a lot of time understanding and providing materials to the public on the Clean Power Plan, and that's what we're doing here today. So our speakers today, I'll introduce and let them take over the program here. We have Sarah Jackson, who many of you have heard on other webinars on this topic. And we have a new Synapse staff member that has joined us, and her name is Ariel Horowitz. So turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Hello, everyone. As Liz mentioned, I will be walking us through the purpose and the mechanics of the Clean Energy Incentive Program that is part of the EPA's final Clean Power Plan. So for any of you who've been following our webinar series, you've probably seen this slide before. It gives a quick rundown of the who, what, when, where, and why of the Clean Power Plan. Essentially, the slide explains that EPA's rule requires reductions in CO2 emissions from the existing fossil-fired generating fleet in 47 states by 2030 in order to combat global climate change. This slide here is also a quick reference slide. It provides a refresher on the different types of credits that are available in the Clean Power Plan, depending on the type of compliance approach a state chooses. So a state, if you recall, a state choosing a rate-based compliance approach would be using what's called emission reduction credits, called ERCs. One ERC represents 1 megawatt-hour of clean energy generation, and an ERC can be traded or sold to a fossil generator who would use it to reduce the carbon intensity of its calculated emissions performance. That's represented on this slide in this equation here. For a state choosing a mass-based approach, the state would award credits in the form of allowances, and an allowance represents 1 ton of CO2 emissions. Allowances can be traded or sold to fossil generators who must then hold a number of allowances equal to the tons of CO2 that are emitted in a year. And I want to make a quick correction. I think I said emission reduction credits, and I meant emission rate credits for ERCs. It's written here in the proper form. So in the EPA's final Clean Power Plan, the EPA is recognizing that renewable energy, certain types of renewable energy and energy efficiency can have really important benefits, particularly for low-income communities that often don't have access to such technologies. Energy efficiency helps consumers save money on energy bills. Energy efficiency and renewable energy projects also provide local jobs and help reduce air pollution by reducing the use of fossil generators. And often these generators are located in these vulnerable communities, making these benefits all the more important. In order to promote these benefits, the Final Clean Power Plan includes this Clean Energy Incentive Program, which provides additional incentives for the early adoption of certain types of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. The Clean Energy Incentive Program is a voluntary program, and states that are not subject to a federal compliance plan can decide whether to participate. If they do, these states have to create a pool of early action credits, which are available to eligible energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. This pool of early action credits has to be drawn from the pool of allowances available in the first compliance period, that's 2022 to 2024, if the state is a mass-based state. And if the state is a rate-based state, those early action credits are borrowed from a future compliance period in a manner that preserves the stringency of the state's rate targets in the future. A quick note is that precise way of determining the stringency, how the stringency is preserved, has not yet been worked out by EPA, but is actually under proposal and out for comment right now. So EPA has also established a pool of matching credits that it will award to eligible projects up to a cap of the equivalent of 300 million tons. And the portion of matching credits that states are eligible for is based on a state's proportional share of the total reductions needed to meet the Clean Power Plan's final 2030 targets nationwide. So what this essentially means is that EPA calculates how many emission reductions are needed to get the entire country to the 2030 targets, and then calculates each state's proportional share of those reductions. The chart on the left on this slide shows the share in millions of tons that each state would get if each state in the country that is subject to the Clean Power Plan participates in the Clean Energy Incentive Program. So if some states choose not to participate, their allotted credits would actually be made available to those states that are, and would be redistributed somehow, either through the same proportional method that I just explained, or EPA has also proposed putting them into a pool and allowing projects to come in on a first come, first served basis. And that approach is also being determined by EPA. So under the Clean Energy Incentive Program, early action credits are awarded to eligible projects. Eligible renewable energy projects are wind and solar resources constructed after submittal of the state's final compliance plan, unless the state is under a federal plan, in which case the eligible resources are those that were constructed after September 6, 2018. These resources must be located in or directly benefiting the participating state, and these projects can earn an early action credit for energy generated in 2020 and 2021. And as we have on this slide, you'll see that for the renewable energy resources, for every 1 megawatt hour of energy from a wind or solar project in 2020 or 2021, the state would award half an early action credit from its own pool, and half of a credit would come from EPA's matching pool. This means that wind and solar projects earn credits on a one-to-one basis. Eligible energy efficiency projects are those measures that are implemented in low-income communities after submittal of the state's final compliance plan, or if the state's under a federal plan, after September 6, 2018. Again, these projects must be located in or directly benefiting the participating state. Low-income energy efficiency projects earn early action credits for energy saved in 2020 and 2021 on a 2-to-1 basis. So this means that for every 1 megawatt hour of energy saved, the project earns a full credit from the state's pool and a matching credit and a full matching credit from EPA. And these credits can be saved and used for compliance in any future year. Now, I'm going to walk through an example that illustrates the flow of allowances under a mass-based approach. Recall from this slide that the distribution of EPA's matching credits, this is the distribution by state, and up here we have Illinois, which is the second from the top, and we're going to use Illinois in our example just to walk through using some real numbers. So going back to our example, first we have the green circle. I think I can use this to indicate. The green circle here represents EPA's full pool of matching credits, so that's that 300 million tons pool. And the small green, the dark green wedge represents Illinois' share of that pool, which is 18 million tons. On this other side, we have Illinois' pool of allowances from its first interim compliance period budget. That's all of its allowances for 2022 to 2024, and that's represented by the orange circle. This under the Clean Power Plan is equal to 240 million tons. So from that amount, Illinois is going to set aside a percentage that they would like to use in the Clean Energy Incentive Program. Here we've said it will be 18 million tons so that they can take full advantage of the EPA's match. So Illinois will put its 18 million tons into its Clean Energy Incentive Program pool. And from this amount, Illinois will award credits to the eligible projects that we just described, the renewable energy, the solar and wind, and the low-income energy efficiency. So if these projects are generating or saving energy during 2020 or 2021, they can take credits from Illinois' pool as well as from EPA's matching pool. So here what we're showing is that if Illinois takes full advantage of the EPA match and awards its entire set-aside, the pool of allowances available during the compliance period has actually grown by 18 million allowances. But emissions have also fallen as a result of the early implementation of the energy efficiency and the renewable energy projects. One note here that we have at the bottom is that this example presumes that all the states are participating in the Clean Energy Incentive Program, so using that division that we just showed from the previous slide, and that all states take a mass-based approach. So if any state were to choose not to participate in the Clean Energy Incentive Program, as we said earlier, that would cause some of those credits from the EPA's matching pool to be redistributed to the other participating states, which would increase their actual available amount of matching credits. Finally, we have a slide just highlighting that the Clean Energy Incentive Program is really representing that EPA is targeting environmental justice communities and trying to ensure that the benefits that can come from these types of projects will be realized in these communities who don't often get to realize these benefits. The focus is, essentially is that there are often a lot of barriers to for these communities to get energy efficiency, and particularly those programs can be more expensive. These communities are also the ones more likely to face the disproportionate impacts from the resources that EPA is targeting in the Clean Power Plan. So there's actually, Synapse will be holding a webinar addressing environmental justice in the Clean Power Plan on December 8th is the tentative date. And for those who want to learn more about that, you can tune in on that day. So now that you have a better idea of how the Clean Energy Incentive Program works and what the mechanics are, I'm going to turn it over to Ariel to walk through some of the key questions that still need answers and the next steps for all of you for participation as EPA continues to develop this program. And as a quick reminder, if you have questions on the substance, you should be sending those in to webinar@synapse-energy.com. Ariel?
Thanks, Sarah. So even though a lot of the goals of the Clean Energy Incentive Program and the basic structure of the program are clear, there are still a lot of key questions left to answer. One really important question is how the Clean Energy Incentive Program is expected to impact trading and compliance, and this will definitely vary depending on whether a state goes with a mass-based compliance approach or a rate-based compliance approach. For mass-based compliance using allowances, the Clean Energy Incentive Program is not expected to affect the trading market that much. This is because the federal matching pool of 300 million tons of carbon dioxide is equivalent to only less than 2% of the total emissions that would otherwise be allowed during all compliance periods. And this is, to a certain extent, by design. The EPA stated that their goal with setting this cap value was to achieve the goal of incentivizing early action projects. For rate-based compliance, however, the EPA has not yet established how this tonnage cap is going to be translated into emission rate credits, or ERCs. We know that state early action ERCs are going to be borrowed from a future compliance period, but because there is no inherent limit on the number of ERCs that can be generated within a given state, some constraint is going to be needed, or mechanism is going to be needed to ensure that the rate targets that EPA has set remain as stringent as they were meant to be. This may look like a retirement of future ERCs or an adjustment of target rates to account for the borrowing of these early action ERCs. EPA is still trying to figure this one out and is taking comments on this topic as well as a number of others. The EPA has set out a number of requests for input, some of which I've laid out here, on a variety of topics about the Clean Energy Incentive Program. That includes details about how to define eligible projects, including what exactly it means to commence construction or commence operations for a renewable energy project or an energy efficiency project, and importantly, what the definition is that EPA should be using of a low-income community. EPA is also asking for input on certain of the program mechanics of awarding the early action credits, including how to evaluate, measure, and verify projects, how to review projects that are submitted to the program, and how to actually issue them early action credits, as well as on the mechanism for how to distribute the set-aside credits that were allocated to states that declined to participate in the program. And they're asking for input on a mechanism for converting between their mass-based matching pool and emission rate credits. Finally, EPA is requesting input on some elements of the general program structure. For example, they know that we're going to have a certain amount of the matching pool reserved for low-income energy efficiency projects and a certain amount of the pool reserved for renewable energy projects, but the sizes of those carve-outs has yet to be determined. They're also asking for alternative proposals or critiques to the current distribution of the matching pool among the states, and for input on how to include states, tribes, and territories for whom goals have not yet been set. And finally, as Sarah mentioned and as we've discussed before, they're asking for input on how to maintain the stringency of their rate-based standards given the borrowing of early action ERCs. So with all that said, there are a lot of things that states should consider when they're trying to think about whether or not to participate in the Clean Energy Incentive Program. Being an incentive program, there are a lot of benefits. The EPA matching certainly provides an incentive for participation. The goal of the program is also partially to allow states to benefit from actions that are already planned to occur in the state that would be generating or saving energy during 2020 and 2021. Incentivizing energy efficiency in low-income communities in particular has a lot of benefits, both for those vulnerable populations in particular, for whom it can help make cost-effective energy efficiency accessible despite having high upfront investment costs. But by lowering the consumption of those customers and therefore reducing their bills, energy efficiency projects in low-income communities can also reduce the rate at which bills go unpaid for a given utility, thereby lowering costs for all consumers of that utility. The Clean Energy Incentive Program does come with a number of risks. As we've mentioned, the rate-based targets may be tightened to account for borrowing of early action ERCs, so that's something that a state would have to consider if they wanted to use a rate-based compliance path and also participate in the Clean Energy Incentive Program. And as I said in the last slide, many specific aspects of the program are still yet to be determined. Importantly, the value of the credits is going to be determined by a market that does not exist at the time that the credits are issued. So it's very hard to predict what the value of those credits is actually going to be, and it could be minimal. And that's something that states should also take into account when they're considering whether or not to participate. It's important to note that states must notify EPA of their intent to participate. This can be a very simple notification, but it is an opt-in program, not an opt-out. So considering all of that, here are some next steps for interested parties. This slide is hopefully to serve as a reference. There are some key dates for input to EPA. They are having a series of calls for interested stakeholders, one of which has already occurred, but 3 of which have yet to happen. There's a call on November 23rd for project partners, one on November 30th for credit issuers, and one on December 1st, that's general Clean Energy Incentive Program issues. The EPA itself also held a webinar discussing the Clean Energy Incentive Program, and the slides to that are available online. And they are accepting comments in a non-regulatory docket, the submission deadline of which is December 15th. You can see the docket number on the slide, and comments can be submitted online, by email, by fax, or by mail. Synapse's Clean Power Planning tool, CP3T, can be a first step in Clean Energy Incentive Program planning. CP3T is an Excel-based spreadsheet tool that can be used for first-pass planning for Clean Power Plan compliance. And it does have the functionality to look at Clean Energy Incentive Program eligible projects in particular. So you'll see that we have there a knob, for example, that you can adjust the percentage of energy efficiency projects that are in low-income communities, and then that will change the calculation of how many Clean Energy Incentive Program early action credits are available. At the moment, we are looking at these only in terms of avoided energy, which leads to compliance in a rate-based world using ERCs. Once the conversion between ERCs and the mass-based early action credit pool has been established, we expect to be able to add that functionality as well. So now I'll pass it over to Liz to talk about some further resources.
Yeah, I'm going to go quickly through a few slides that we have here talking about Synapse resources, and then I will turn to questions. I've had a few questions now come in from the audience that's listening, and I think we'll have time for those and some more. So please go ahead and start sending your questions into webinar@synapse-energy.com. The resources slides that you'll have in front of you, the first one here is about Synapse's Clean Power Plan Toolkit. And this is the analysis that we have put together to help out stakeholders in various states to understand the impacts of Clean Power Plan for your state. It has a lot of detail to it. You'll see in sort of the bottom right CP3T, that's a standalone tool that anyone with some electric sector experience can use back in their offices, on their own computer. You can download it for free from our website and start doing some screening of different scenarios for how to comply with the Clean Power Plan. That is a screening tool. It gets you started down this road. We think that for detailed modeling to put together a final plan to submit to EPA, or for more in-depth stakeholder conversations, that states will need dispatch modeling to do detailed modeling of their electric sector and what is running, what isn't running, and when, and that's what the toolkit provides. This is a list of some resources that we have up on our website that might be helpful to you, including the past webinars, those slides and audio recordings are up there. We've done a series of reports and webinars for the SUCA, for consumer advocates, and that work is up there too. We have another report coming out for NASUCA about the final Clean Power Plan that should be coming out in the next 1 or 2 weeks and be available to everybody up on our website. We've also done some different blog posts about some of the interesting issues and confusing topics that a lot of people are talking about in Clean Power Plan and want to hear more about and dig into, and so that can be a good resource too. We've also had a series of webinars and policy briefs and reports that we've done about Clean Power Plan that are also available at the links that you see there. The future webinars that we have coming up, we had mentioned the environmental justice in the Clean Power Plan coming up on December 8th. On December 15th, we're going to be doing a webinar and having a report come out about energy efficiency in the Clean Power Plan. And then later on, just into January, we're planning to present some detailed modeling that we're working on now that's about the bill impacts of the Clean Power Plan. And just a final couple things here, how to keep connected with us, give some different links and web addresses to help you out. So let's turn to questions. So let me start with a couple kind of nuts and bolts questions to help everybody out. Can you go back to slide 9 to help with this? So we understand that there's a federal pool of allowances, a matching pool. The first question about that, that's 300 million tons. Why is it 300 million tons? Why that number?
Good question. So the way EPA explained it in the Clean Power Plan was to say that they were estimating the amount of emission reductions that could be achieved by the amount of renewable energy and energy efficiency that could be incentivized through a program like this. So my understanding is that EPA looked back at historical maximums for the wind and solar resources and for certain types of energy efficiency and calculated the number of allowances that would be available if such generation were actually built and continued to operate during 2020 and 2021. Mm-hmm. And there's some calculations that are made in there to figure out, to get from megawatt hours to 2 tons. Mm-hmm. And that is essentially what EPA was looking at, how they got to this 300 million tons figure.
Okay. And just looking at slide 9 here for a second, just to reiterate maybe a little bit more detail, how is that getting broken down among the states? What are the shares based on that breaks it down among the states?
So yeah, it's a little bit confusing to explain, I think, but the idea is that to get from, and I believe they start in 2012, to get from 2012 to the goal in 2030 that EPA has set, EPA aggregates that goal to a national goal and calculates how many emission reductions are needed to get in tons, to get from 2012 to 2030, and then breaks each state's portion of those needed reductions out. So Texas, from this graphic here, needs the most reductions in total tons, as a proportion of the rest of the goal. Therefore, Texas is able to get more of these credits under the Clean Energy Incentive Program mm-hmm. from the matching pool.
Is it roughly proportional to current day electric sector emissions?
I don't know the answer to that, but
based on the expected reductions.
It's based on the expected reductions that would come from each state mm-hmm. over that course of time.
Okay, so probably based on from current to target and that amount of reduction, and then that becomes the proportion. Is that closer to the method? Okay. And with the federal matching pool, that's completely separate from the state's pool, or how do the two things relate?
That's supplementary to the state's allowance budgets. So the states have a certain amount of allowances that they can give out during the first compliance period, and then over and above that, there's this 300 million tons of carbon dioxide that EPA will make available. So it is an increase in the total allowable emissions during the first compliance period, or if it's banked during later compliance periods, but that's offset by emission reductions before compliance actually begins.
Mm-hmm. And so states are able to award these credits or allowances to certain kinds of renewables, certain kinds of efficiency directed at low-income populations, and these are just for projects that come into existence after a certain date. Can you explain that part? So it can't. Yeah. If they existed today, they're not eligible. Is that right?
Right. I think there's still a little bit of figuring out what precise measures might be included.
And everything's up for comment still.
Right, exactly.
Based on what's been said.
But EPA has established that, so taking one step back, every state that gets subject to a federal plan, so a state that doesn't submit a plan at all or that submits a plan that EPA deems unacceptable, will be subject to the federal plan, and EPA has determined that all states under a federal plan will participate in the Clean Energy Incentive Program. In those states, projects that begin or commence operation or commence construction after September 6, 2018, those are the eligible projects. I think it's a little bit looser with the states that submit their own plans, because a state could choose to submit a plan earlier than that, and my understanding is that if a state were to submit a plan, let's say in 2017, then projects that that are built or implemented after that plan is submitted, that final plan is submitted, they're all eligible for the Clean Energy Incentive Program. So there's a little bit of leeway for states who choose to do a state compliance plan to have more time and give more projects,
right,
access to this program.
So overall, though, it's for projects that are put into place. There's some question about what put into place means, but are put into place after you submit your plan.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And how much creativity can states have here in terms of the states are awarding these allowances or credits to specific programs? Do they have to give them out on the sort of strict half a credit per megawatt hour, or one credit per? Can they get creative about that and give somebody three credits per megawatt hour to add an extra incentive, or does it need to follow this structure?
Yeah, so it's pretty well set in stone in the Clean Power Plan that it's a 1-to-1, as we explained, for renewable energy, for solar and wind, and a 2-to-1 for low-income energy efficiency. The bit of flexibility that comes into play is that states could choose to make their state pool, even bigger. They'll only get the amount of matching credits that EPA is allowing them, but they could make the program bigger from the state perspective if they so choose. So a state could include could pull additional allowances from that first compliance period to make their pool larger, and that would allow projects to continue to generate at least partial credits, the state's half of the credits, even if the matching credits from EPA run out. So there's a little flexibility for you, but in general, I think the answer to your question is no. The EPA has established which types of resources can receive the credits and what proportion of credits can be received.
I see. And I think we might be having a little technical problem on our slide video right now, and we're working to get those slides back up so you can see them again. I know on my screen they're kind of coming in and out. So we are working on it, so apologies for that. Has EPA eliminated, this is a question about if EPA has eliminated the state match requirement under the program and is only offering federal match credits. So if they, it's a what-if question, I'm sorry. So if they were to do that, would it fix the issue about maintaining stringency on the rate-based approach? So do you think that it's the existence of the kind of doubling of the pool that's creating the stringency problem? And if there were no state match and it was just coming out of the federal pool, would you still have the same problem?
That's an interesting question. I think that the stringency issue is coming from the fact that there's an unlimited amount of ERCs that could be generated, unlike a mass-based approach where you have a finite number of allowances or tons. ERCs are based on carbon intensity, so you could have as many. And I think, so the idea is that if you're borrowing them from the future, you'd have to make sure that those, however many there are that come out of this clean energy incentive program, are accounted for sometime in the future, so you're not just adding, you know, in addition to the EPA's match, these additional early action ERCs. So I suppose in theory, if you eliminated the creation of that early, the state's pool of early ERCs, you could address this issue, but I'm not sure that EPA would allow a match without a state.
Right, sort of a balance to be struck here. There are some conflicting goals and kind of a balance between those things, given the incentive, making sure that you know, the emissions are taken out somewhere and not just added up, and we have to kind of balance the different areas. Is Synapse starting to think about the appropriate conversion ratio between ERCs and allowances? I think that's a great question, and we don't have an answer for you yet. So we're thinking about that. I'm sure lots of people are as they prepare comments for EPA, and that is one of the issues that EPA is thinking about. Did either want to comment on that, or is that?
Yeah, well, so this is Sarah. I will just say that in the Clean Power Plan itself, EPA references a calculation that it used. I think I was explaining to you earlier, Liz, the way that the 300 million ton cap was determined. And in that calculation, EPA uses an average carbon intensity number to multiply the projected generation by an intensity to get a number of tons. And in the Clean Power Plan, that is 0.8 tons per megawatt hour. I don't have any indication that EPA would use that same calculation to determine the conversion, but it's at least a hint of what EPA did to determine its 300 million ton cap. Right. So you can look there for a little guidance. I don't think we at Synapse have determined the right way yet, but
I think we're having visual problems again, but we'll keep on doing our questions. So when the state is giving out, and the EPA together, it's matching, they're giving out these credits or allowances to whom? For example, let's use the example of renewable energy for a second. Who is it in the renewable energy example that gets the credit? Is it a generator? Is it the utility that's buying that energy? Who gets the credit?
So I think that's essentially one of the questions Ariel pointed out is still being worked out. I've heard the same question before. You know, does EPA give the matching credit to the state? Does EPA give the credit directly to the project? And I think that hasn't yet been determined, and I think EPA is looking for comments on what the best process is for that distribution. And also, you know, if folks on the phone are participating and have an idea about how that could be done, I think EPA is welcoming those comments.
Yeah, I guess I'd be surprised, and you two know more about this than I do, I'd be surprised if on the RA side that the state allocation of credit, giving that credit out, wasn't going to the generator, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't going to the program administrator on the EE side. Right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. No, I think that's
who gets the idea. Giving out credits, who gets the credit. Yeah.
Right. I think that's who the credit eventually ends up with that would then be available for purchase by or transfer in some other method to other emitting power plants. But how the credit actually gets there is still yet to be determined.
Sure. Yeah. So going on and thinking about this idea of how what's going on with these credits and who gets them, here's a question in which the person writing is expressing the concern, or has heard the concern stated, that CEIP may compete with other types of compliance, and for that reason it might be something that is not popular to utilities or to some other actors in this, that it represents a kind of competition, and that for maybe where you're getting your allowances, or what's the counterfactual here? What if we don't have CEIP? What's different?
I think the worry if we don't have CEIP is that states that are currently investing in energy efficiency in low-income communities or in renewable energy would think that they should wait, that they should pause those efforts until after the compliance period starts, when they would be getting credit for them under the Clean Power Plan. So I think that's the concern with not having it.
I'm not seeing the issue on the rate-based side. I mean, somebody has to get these ERCs so that generators can buy them, right? But on the allowance tons-based side, if the allowances can be given out in just about any manner. I mean, if you're using a federal plan, that's one thing, or a model rule. But aside from that, states can auction them, they can give them away, you could give them all to fossil generators, you could use these set-asides that EPA has proposed, and maybe there is a give and take there, where if you're giving the allowances in a mass-based world, you're giving the allowances to EE program administrators, to renewables, both in the CEIP and elsewhere, then you're not giving them to someone else. If you're auctioning them, then, well, you could buy them on the auction, or you could buy them from RE and EE. But if you're planning to give them to, grandfather them or otherwise give them to fossil fuel generators, then maybe there is a give and take. What do you think about that?
I see where the question is coming from, but I also think that the EPA seems to have done that on purpose. I mean, they've targeted these particular types of resources for incentives, and they have, listed a number of reasons for that, including the benefits that they see from these resources, and also their desire that has been expressed throughout the Clean Power Plan to help alleviate the impacts that could occur at low-income or vulnerable communities, or environmental justice communities. And so I think that this program is designed to give that little extra incentive and that extra benefit to those types of resources. I also think, building off of Ariel's point a little bit about, maybe trying to address some disincentive, you recall that the proposed compliance period was supposed to start in 2020, and EPA pushed that timeline back to 2022. So in a way, it's also, it seems like this program is using the benefit or the incentive to try to continue to achieve some progress during those years that have now been removed from the compliance period, but you wouldn't want to lose progress. And I think rewarding states that are acting early, or are acting perhaps on their own, but perhaps in anticipation of the Clean Power Plan, is something that EPA wanted to do as well. So incentives for the types of resources they want to see impacting communities that are of concern to EPA, wanting to reward early actors, and wanting to incentivize certain types of actions, I think is the point of the program.
Right, and so part of what you're saying there is that we should consider this program in the context of the whole plan having been rolled back by 2 years in the final version, right? Yeah.
It's also worth remembering that the Clean Energy Incentive Program set-asides are relatively small for mass-based compliance. So it's, for example, in the case of Illinois, it's 7.5% of their total allowance budget for the first compliance period. So even though those allowances may be reserved for renewable energy and energy efficiency programs, there's still the lion's share of the allowance budget for other sorts of projects to be auctioned or to be handed to fossil fuel generators or anything of that nature. So I think the extent to which it's creating that sort of competition.
Right. Probably. We also wouldn't want anybody to mistake allowances being given to fossil fuel generators with those not having an impact on the wholesale price of energy or on rates, that those are two different things. And even when allowances are giveaways, that they still impact on rates. And there are other kinds of designs for allowance systems that are needed in order to mitigate those kind of effects. So, can you explain a little bit about the low-income definition? And I know this is also up for comment, but for example, could it refer to an industrial commercial building in a low-income area, something like that, or a cooperative venture in a low-income area that was an industrial commercial purpose? I'm extrapolating here, but does it mean households?
I don't think EPA has defined low-income yet at all. I know that states who administer low-income energy efficiency programs have definitions that may or may not be in common with each other, and I don't know if EPA would be influenced by those definitions. So I think that you could look to if there's a common definition, but I think that that's a subject that EPA is taking comment on, and so to the extent that people have suggestions for how the definition could help make the program the best program or the most beneficial program, then I think EPA is looking for those comments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why that's still open for comment. So help me out with an example about energy efficiency. So let's say I start a new low-income energy efficiency program. It is in operation in 2018, and it starts to have savings. Starting in it begins its lifetime of savings in 2018. When we get to 2020 and 2021, it has particular savings in those years. What is it that's generating CEIP credits for me here? Is it the lifetime? Is it in those years? Just clarify a little bit. So it was the plan, let's say the plan was turned in 2017. They opened for business in 2018.
Right, so they're eligible.
They're eligible, but when can they start making credits, and on what?
So my understanding of that is that the measure, it's the megawatt hour savings that occur in that year. So you get your credit, whether it be an ERC or an allowance, you get your credit for the megawatt hour of savings that occurred in 2020. And then you get another one for the megawatt hour of savings that occurred in 2021.
Do you get anything for 2018 and 2019?
Nope.
No. It's just for the savings that occur in those 2 years. Those savings. Okay.
But you do get emission reductions for them for those 2018 savings. So I mean, the EPA is saying that you're getting these benefits early. It's helping you in compliance. It's reducing your compliance obligation overall. So that's an added benefit. You're just not being
getting the credit
rewarded in the same way for that. Right.
I've had a couple of questions that were about getting the slides, and so all of the slide deck is coming to you. If you're on this webinar, you'll be getting the slide deck. We will also have the audio, so you can put the two things together too. So for people that ask me, can you put back up a slide? I didn't get something on it. That's coming to you. So, can states decide how much to use these CEIP credits for RE and how much for low-income EE, or is that set? Can they decide what the balance is?
My understanding of it is that there will be an amount of the federal matching pool that's set aside for EE and an amount of the federal matching pool that's set aside for renewables. And that most likely, but is yet to be determined, but those two set-asides most likely will not add up to the total $300 million. So there will be wiggle room in the middle. So states will have some ability, in our understanding, to set the ratio, but there will be limits on how far that ratio can go to either direction.
But only if they're using the model rule or the federal plan, right? You don't have to use the set-asides.
Well, if you're going to participate in the Clean Energy Incentive Program, you do have to include a set-aside for, at least for the Clean Energy Incentive Program, because you have to take those emissions out, or those allowances out. So I think, so what Ariel's saying is EPA's pool, the matching pool, the free pool, will be, some portion will be saved for both types of resources. They have not yet determined the size of each you know, of each division. But there will be some wiggle room because states are ultimately going to get to decide if you wanted to have your entire CEIP program be low-income energy efficiency measures. So, you know, forget wind and solar, you're just going to do EE. I think that a state can do that, and I'm not entirely sure how the matching allowances will be determined, but I think that they'll be calculated for each state based on their program. And I say that without knowing entirely what EPA's plan is for this. But
because it hasn't been, that element hasn't been drawn out yet.
Right.
So it's another matter for comment, and that we'll expect to see more detail about in the final version of this program.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I know we've got just a little bit more time, that maybe another 7 minutes. I'm hoping that you can walk us through the other side of this. So we've been talking a lot about how these credits and allowances get generated for the CEIP program. What is the point of the credits and allowances? How do they get used? Who uses them? Let's turn to the other side of that so that that's clear too. And what is the purpose of these and where are they going?
So I think we discussed a little earlier that someone will be holding these credits, either the project developers or the program administrators for the energy efficiency. And they will have the opportunity to sell or trade or somehow give those credits over to resources, fossil generating resources who have to use the credits for compliance. So the compliance period starts in 2022. So you can start selling or putting into the market these credits that you've received and, you know, getting money for them in return. And the fossil generators are then going to use them at any point in the future. So you could take one of these early action credits and use it for compliance in 2030 or in 2022. You know, you can use it during any point in the period. You can save it, bank it. You could also retire it if you're a program administrator and you don't want to sell it. You want to use it to, you know, save more of an additional ton of CO2, then you could retire that credit. I think it can be used in the same way that any other credit in the compliance period can be used.
So in mass-based compliance, just for example, if I am a coal-fired power plant, then for every year from 22 to 2030, if I want to emit a ton of CO2, I need an allowance in my hand, right? For every ton of CO2, I need an allowance. And the question is, where am I going to get these allowances? And not all of them are going to come from CEIP.
Right.
But some small share will come from there, and the other share, well, the state's going to have to figure that out. Are they handing them out? Are they auctioning them off and then doing something with that revenue? But that's the end game there. It's a little bit more complicated to say it quite so succinctly on the rate side. But the end game on the mass side is if you want to emit a ton of carbon, you must own an allowance.
Yes.
And unless your state's been awarding them to you for free, you're going to have to buy them.
Yes.
So, and RE and EE providers that fall under these particular characteristics, fall into this plan, could be one place that you're going to buy them from. You might be buying other ones from a state auction. Or are there other possibilities out there of who may own them? Those are pretty much
from other states if the
you
state
buy
is
them from other states,
in trading.
Right? But from RE or EE providers in other states, or from another state's auction, or it could be a joint auction. But that's where they're heading. I wish I had a simple way to say that on the rate side, but I don't. It's like that on the rate side, but a little bit different. So, okay, I've got a good trick question for you guys that I know I can never quite get right, but I believe in you. So, so there's an eligible wind farm in one state, and it's selling its electricity to another state. There's a PPA, purchase power agreement, that's associated with that, selling the energy. Who gets the allowances or credits? Wait, two questions. Who gives them and who gets them? So state A has the wind farm. State B is using the energy, the PPA, who gives the allowances or credits, who gets the allowances or credits.
So my understanding is that the way EPA defines it is an eligible project is located in or benefiting directly the state who is issuing the credits. So if the state that has the PPA and is receiving the energy, you would say that that is the state that is benefiting from the project, then that state would presumably award the credits to the project proponent. I think.
Maybe another subject for comment.
That's my, yeah.
Some of these things they're not spelled out exactly yet, and they're going to come up. So
I won't say that's my final answer.
It's not your final answer. It's a good answer.
That's what I think.
Do you have any knowledge that federal funding of programs, like weatherization program, that kind of thing, federal funding, does that affect eligibility for CEIP at all?
Not that I turned up.
Yeah, I didn't see any mention of it, but I don't know at this point. That's not a question I can answer.
And can you tell us a little bit about how the issue of EM&D relates to CEIP, with some spelling out of all those initials?
Sure. So the measurement and verification, sorry, what was the
Evaluation, yeah, evaluation, measurement, and verification.
I kept thinking enforcement. Evaluation, measurement, and verification of projects. So you have to actually verify that a project is generating a certain amount of energy or saving a certain amount of energy. And that, for example, for an energy efficiency project, that it exists in a low-income community, a qualifying low-income community, that it actually commenced operation after the eligibility date. But again, the mechanisms for doing all of that checking to make sure that a project qualifies for the program and is actually avoiding or generating qualifying electricity, that's all yet to be determined how that's going to happen.
I'm going to do one last question, and then we're going to sign off here. So you've looked at what EPA is specifically looking for comment on. Is the timing one of those things, the timing of the CEIP program, in terms of what years savings or energy would actually generate CEIPs? Is that up for comment?
I don't think the years in which the energy saved or generated that counts is up for comment, but the timing of when the credits are actually issued is up for comment. So not what counts, but how it actually gets awarded.
Okay, and I know I didn't get to everybody's questions. I got to a lot of them, though. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have a question that wasn't answered, please go ahead and write to us again. Either write to one of the emails that you see here or write again to webinar. So we're not going to go back in time and try to answer questions that didn't quite get answered that people sent to me here. But if you feel like there's something that we didn't answer for you, you'd like to ask it of us again, go ahead and write to us. You see our emails here up in front of you, and we'd love to hear from you. And we hope to have you all join us again for the rest of the webinar series. Thanks, everyone.